Okay, just a quick, brief video from the Lord's Prayer there in Luke 11. Although I prefer the Matthew version, I think, so I'll read it from the Matthew version. And I'm not going to go like line by line. There are only really a few things I need to point out from it that are relevant to the topic. So, we're going to go over here to Matthew 6, the Lord's Prayer. I memorized it growing up in a particular way, so it's not going to match word for word the version that I have, the NKJV version. So I'm just going to say it the way I'm accustomed to saying it, except for at one place, and when we get there, I'll stop and explain why I'm reading it the way I'm reading it. So, Our Father in heaven, or Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come. Okay, thy kingdom come. So we talked about how the kingdom had not yet arrived, but it does arrive at the beginning of the millennium. And Revelation 11:15 tells us that what was entailed by the Father and the Son coming into their kingdom was the kingdoms of this world being transferred over to them. Prior to that time, it was the devil who had control over the kingdoms of this world. That's why we see the devil offering the kingdoms to Jesus in Matthew 4, verse 1, and tempting him to worship before him in exchange for those kingdoms. So this our kingdom come is in reference to this event in Revelation when the kingdoms of this world finally do get transferred to the Father and to his Son, Revelation 11:15. Your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Well, his will can now be done on earth once the kingdoms of the world are transferred over. Give us this day our daily bread. This is a deliberate contrast to Yahweh when he brought the Jews out of Egypt and through the wilderness. He was really not providing them with their daily bread. He was starving them and causing them to pant and thirst. He did not do anything until the Jews cried out. And so Jesus here in stark contrast is, as we just saw in the last video, he provides in abundance over and above what is needed. And we saw that with the feeding of the 5,000, where Jesus miraculously multiplies the fish and the bread. So they asked their Father here in the Lord's Prayer, give us this day our daily bread. And forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. I'm going to retain that language here. In fact, this is where we need to go over to the Luke version, because the Luke version is a little more explicit about one point. The Luke 11 version says, forgive us our sins, for we also forgive everyone who is indebted to us. So while we can certainly approach this in a general sense as this being a mandate to forgive those who really sin against us in general, who mistreat us or misbehave or betray us in one way or another, but it also the language is very reminiscent of Old Testament language about pecuniary debt, monetary debt. And so I think it is no coincidence that the language here says, for we also forgive everyone who is indebted to us. Because that's another contrast with Yahweh. In Deuteronomy 15, you see just the opposite. Yahweh tells them not to remit the debt of everyone who is indebted to them, but only certain persons. Deuteronomy 15, starting at verse 1. At the end of every 7 years, you shall grant a remission of debts. So the order of the remission is as follows. Every debt your neighbor owes you, you shall remit. You shall not demand it back from your brother, because a remission is proclaimed for the Lord your God. You may demand it back from a foreigner, but you shall grant remission of your brother's debt. So their brother or their neighbor was their fellow Jew. Or in some cases, or it was either their fellow Jew, the one who was native born, or the resident alien. But the foreigner, they did not have to forgive the foreigner's debt. Luke 11 says something very different. He expands the language to read just as, to read, as we forgive everyone their debts. Everyone without exception. And then, as we spoke about a few videos back, lead us not into temptation, which is another contrast, because Yahweh actually is quite unapologetic and very open about the fact that he specifically starved the people in order to test them. Just as the devil tested Jesus in the wilderness, Yahweh tested the children of Israel in the wilderness. So there's another parallel between Jesus and the Yahweh and the devil. Another indicator that they are the same person. In the same way that Yahweh said, all of the earth is mine, and the devil in Matthew 4 said, I will give you the kingdoms of the world if you fall down and worship me. Again, it's the same person. There's no evidence anywhere in the Old Testament that between Exodus and the coming of Jesus, there were two individuals, and that the kingdoms of this world were somehow at one point in time transferred from the control of Yahweh to control of a separate figure called the devil or Satan. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from the evil one. So clearly the evil one is Yahweh, the tempter. So at every point here in the Lord's Prayer, virtually every point, there is a subtle contrast being made between Yahweh and the Father of Jesus. So that's the main point I wanted to make in this video. And we'll pick up again with a new variation on this theme. It's going to actually get very interesting. I'm holding back on some of the most interesting aspects of this theme. There are some very deeply esoteric concepts that we're going to be covering in the Old Testament. I covered one the other day from Leviticus 24 and connected that up with the lost word of Freemasonry. There are other things like that we're going to be coming across when we cover more of the Old Testament. All right, so I will be back.